We are talking to Cavs corner publisher Brad Franklin, who knows all things Virginia football, with the tilt on Friday where NC State travels to Charlottesville, 7:30 p.m. on ESPN, in what has been dubbed the Brennan Armstrong Bowl. And trust me, we probably both have heard a lot about Brennan Armstrong in the last 3 months leading up to this game. I guess what's the vibe up there?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us have heard a lot about Brendan Armstrong for a lot longer than just the last week.
But I mean specifically about this game.
Yeah, for sure. No, listen, I think this is one that's been circled on a lot of people's calendars for a long time. The idea that, Brendan was going to come back, that Dr. Bob was going to be coming back, that Tuesday's coming back. And, I think for some fans, there's going to be some mixed emotions. I think the vast majority of folks who are on the UVA side of things, I think, on the one hand, wish Brendan well, but also would love to get a win here. And that only marginally has anything to do with him. I think last season left a lot of fans feeling really conflicted, sort of about what his I don't want to say the word legacy because that sounds too dramatic, but I mean, he came in and he had such an incredible season the year before, and his name is littered all through the record book, and then for last season to go the way it went, and I think that, as I've said in various places for the last couple months, I think a lot of folks share the blame for that. And I'm not sure if Brendan feels like he should or whatever, but I think for fans, there's definitely some of that, like not really sure where to put this thing right on the shelf, right? Like, does it go in this box? Does it go in that box? And so I think the reaction will be fairly positive. I think he'll definitely have some detractors. He'll definitely have some folks who will really hope that Virginia gets its pressure game going and is able to create some havoc in the backfield, create some turnovers that the Cavaliers haven't been able to this point in the season to create. And I think ultimately a lot of fans honestly would probably really like to see Brendan have the kind of game he had the last time he was there, which was a couple pick sixes right off the bat, and kind of a rough afternoon to say the least against Pittsburgh. But I think by and large the vibe is that fans have a lot bigger concerns beyond just Brendan, but certainly that storyline is unavoidable, and there's no way to look at this game without sort of kind of trying to surmise sort of what it feels like in the big picture.
No, and it's always interesting because, down here in Raleigh, we had Russell Wilson transfer from NC State to Wisconsin, but they didn't have to play them.
Right.
And Devin Leary is now at Kentucky. Don't have to play him. Hasn't been a lot of Devin Leary talk. Maybe it would become more of a thing if all of a sudden, like, Kentucky's like 10-0 or something. I don't know. But I always find it interesting with guys like Armstrong or Sam Hartman at Notre Dame. Like 5 years from now, are they tailgating at Virginia? Are they tailgating at Wake Forest? Are they going to tailgate at both schools that they go to? I mean, obviously, I think most people think of Brendan Armstrong as a Virginia Cavalier. And, sounds like his girlfriend or fiance played soccer there. And so, down the road, it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. But this isn't a knock against Armstrong, but do you think that with the program the way it is right now, and with the future of what that program needs, having possibly the freshman quarterback be the guy, if everything works out, might be the best thing for Virginia's future? And in a way, it might work out for everybody.
No, I think that's a really good summation, man. I think in the big scheme of things, right, it was best for everybody, for Brennan, for the program, for everybody, that after sort of the Jekyll and Hyde, so to speak, between 2021 and 2022 for him on the field. I just think that it was better for everybody that he had that fresh start. Ideally, you would have, I think, liked to seen him go someplace where he didn't have, the system piece of things already locked in. I think for his development, as well as for maybe the way pro scouts might view him. But at the end of the day, like, you just want to go out and be successful. So whatever system you're running, you just want to run it well. I think it was good for him to get a change of scenery. I think for fans, we watched Kihei Clark, right, for 1,100 years. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, I think fans get a little bit weird when they've seen a guy for a long, long time, right? All the warts stick out. And Brennan's situation was such that he came out, few people remember sort of the year he had before 2021, right? When it's, it was a struggle
2,500
for him.
yards and what?
Yeah, and there were some rough spots, and then he came back and he had just an absolutely fantastic season, and folks really, I think, expected full stop that he was going to come back in and do something similar last year, and it just didn't happen. Right now, you can't cry over the spilled milk. You can't sort of put the put the Wayback Machine in gear and rewrite it. But what you can do, I think, is sort of move forward from it. And I think Virginia with Anthony Calandria is trying to do that. I think Tony Muskett honestly was the perfect sort of bridge, if you think about it. What Virginia really needed from Brennan last year was exactly the kind of thing that I think that Muskett, was poised, I think, before the injury to give him this year, which is a steady hand at the wheel. Last year, Brennan was just very inefficient. I think he took a lot of deep shots that he didn't necessarily need to take. I think he was trying to sort of stir the echoes, so to speak, of the year before, but he's trying to do it in a different system that asks different things of him. And Calandria seems to really fit what Tony Elliott and Des Kitchens want to do in this offense. He's clearly got a lot of moxie. He's got a spunk to him. He's a kid who clearly puts the time in with the receivers. He's got, a specific handshake with every receiver, which is not something that I'm accustomed to seeing in covering UVA football. And I think he's, in terms of his skill set, he's he's got a nice array, right? He's got a little wiggle to him, really nice arm, good mechanics. He can sees and understands defense as well. So I think he's a nice sort of prospect for the future, and certainly him getting time this year helps both him and the program. Now, it's a transfer portal era, so you're going to have to sort of, for lack of a description, re-recruit your guys every year. That's just the name of the game, right? Especially your good players. Virginia's kind of in a position, on defense right now, because in addition to losing Anthony Johnson from last year's squad at corner, they also lost Ventrell Cypress, who was one of the ACC's best corners last year. Now he's in Tallahassee. Well, you know what? Transfer portal era, that's what happens sometimes. You have a really good player. You think you're finally sort of making hay on their development, and then they decide to go someplace else. So I think Calandria, at least for now, he's what they need. We'll wait and see what happens tomorrow night under the lights in Scott Stadium, whether or not it's Muskett or whether or not it's Calandria that gets the start. Certainly felt like last week, Muskett was in a position to be the guy again, and Tony Elliott and Des Kitchens both had come out and said, listen, guy's not going to lose the starting job because of injury. He just wasn't able to go. Calandria, I think, had a good first half and not very good at all second half. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But I think there's no question that it was good for UVA football that Brennan decided to use his extra year of eligibility somewhere else. And to say that about a guy who is your school's, all-time passing leader, like I said, his name is all over the record book for a reason. He just had an incredible time there. It ended in the way it did, and I think it's best for everybody, sort of the way things have moved forward.
And then, just big picture on offense. I mean, I think the receivers are the strength, but, does it really just come down to at some point whether the offensive line can click or not?
Yeah, I mean, man, I feel like I'm gonna answer your question with a question, right? Which is like, what year has UVA football existed when the Cavaliers didn't have questions on the offensive line, right? It's been a long time since Virginia football was in a position on the front where, you're not trying to see young guys develop. You're not trying to figure out new pieces. It feels like every year it's like Groundhog Day on the offensive line for UVA. And that's just sort of been the case, right? It was that way under Touche. It was that way before him. I think Virginia fans are really hoping it's not that way down the road. But I think that when you look at recruiting in that area has just not necessarily been what it needed to be. You can do a lot in the transfer portal, right? But you can't do everything. And I think this is a perfect example of that, right? They get Nana, who is a kid who everybody, was all over, wanted desperately. And to this point in the season, he has not looked very comfortable. Now, they made some changes last week on the offensive line that seemed to have sort of clicked a little bit. They moved Brian Stevens over to center. They moved Ty Furnish over to guard. And that feels like it might click. Now, if it holds and they're able to sort of get some stability there and kind of grow that thing a little bit, maybe we're not having this conversation a year from now that the offensive line once again is a question mark. But I've written so many offensive line is the crux of the issue stories in my day, edited so many of them too. Like it is just it's a fact that goes along with UVA football, like orange and blue, right? The offensive line has continually been a problem. And I think that the good thing about Calandria is that he's got enough of a skill set, and to be fair, I think Musket does too, that can maybe take a little pressure off. And that's what I think you've seen the last couple of weeks, right? Yeah, the offensive line was really struggling against Tennessee. They were not necessarily the problem in College Park last week. I think the interesting piece of this is going to be, all right, we know what NC State typically is in the front seven. What they are up front. Does that same situation hold? I don't expect Virginia's all of a sudden going to be able to have a guy who's going to run for 1,000 yards or anything, but I do think that some balance might be actually attainable if the offensive line can play more consistently like they did against Maryland last week. But then again, if they start sort of trending back toward where they were in the first week, or especially with penalties, I mean, holds have been just an absolute killer. False starts have been an absolute killer. There's lots of work to do, and it definitely includes the offensive line. That's for sure.
Another kind of big picture, actually counted it up today. I think Virginia has signed or landed 16 offensive linemen between 2021 and 2024. Obviously it takes time for offensive linemen to develop. Where's the patience level at this point in the rebuild? Do you sense that fans are okay? I'm going to say okay, but they understand that things might be pointing towards 2025, might be pointing towards 2026.
Yeah. Listen, I think there are certainly situations where, you're going to have a coaching change and it's going to invite that sort of long-term optimism, right?
I lived it as a reporter when
right.
we replaced Tom O'Brien.
I think the problem
first year, this thing was going to take some time.
Yeah, the problem that UVA fans run into is that this was not a situation where look, it's one of two things, right? Coach either gets fired and because things are terrible, right? Or coach leaves because things are great, right? And in both of those situations, fans are typically happy. Fans are happy because things are great, and yeah, we lost our coach, but you know what? We're cooking, we're good. Or this thing was terrible. I hated everything about this program the last insert number of months here, but I'm really glad that we're going to have a fresh start. Well, when Bronco decided to quit, it left Virginia in a weird lurch, which was like things were fine, right? Wasn't bad, wasn't good, right? Reasons to be happy, reasons to be frustrated, right? And so I think for a lot of fans,
8 wins every year.
Tony Elliott comes in, right? And he starts talking about culture this and model program that. And this is no shade at him. I mean, look, this is what coaches do, right? They come in, they've been excited their whole lives to get the opportunity to be a head coach, and they want to put their thing in there. And there were a lot of folks who resisted. There were players who resisted. There were fans who resisted. And I think many of those same fans are in the same spot. So it's weird. It's like most coaching changes, you get a little bit of a runway because you had a little bit of a honeymoon. There was no honeymoon here. Right. This thing was weird from the start. It was immediately sort of tenuous. It was almost awkward. Obviously year one did nothing to change the momentum there. The tragedy at the end of the year, I think for a lot of folks, that complicates the entire picture because it's hard to really gauge, okay, well, what was it really like? And, kids have been dealing with so much more. How much can you really put on the football piece of it? I think at the end of the day, you have to judge just the football piece of it. And what I've seen, over the course of these 2 seasons is not a program that really is giving fans reason to look at 2025. It's giving fans every reason to be really frustrated. There's a reason, I think, why when you look at not just like the engagement side of things, but just in general, fans, there's like I said, there's a pretty substantial number of folks who just were already sort of out from the start and who never really have come back. And when you lose that sort of piece of it early. The only thing, the one thing that's going to bring them back is wins. And you can't wait until 2025 to bring those wins.
Sure.
You know, that the program has a brand new football ops center that's going to be opening soon. And there should be a renewed sense of optimism about it. There should be a renewed sense of excitement about the program. They've been dealing with the McHugh Center since the first Reagan administration. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where you have a lot of folks right now, I think, who are looking at the board, so to speak, and wondering like, okay, is this the direction that we want this thing to go? And I think for some fans, they're willing to give Tony and his folks some time. I think for some other fans, you know, they've already sort of made up their mind. And the question is going to be which one of those factions sort of ends up being right. And the wins are all that matter at this point.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at what Dave Doran did his first real recruiting class. I do know that when Tom O'Brien got Mike Glennon in that particular group, it created a hope, you know, and I always say every coach is great when there's 0-0 at their new
Absolutely.
school. And I don't know if Virginia really got that chance to create that kind of recruiting hope before, you know, Coach Elliott's very first game. But I think that also goes a long way. Is just, you know, people like to see recruiting momentum.
Yeah.
So watching Virginia's defense, you know, I think there's key cogs there. I think the size of the defense looks pretty good. Maybe it could use like one or two guys that can pop, you know, like that might be like the finishing touches. If they were to develop somebody who can make the big strip or get the big interception or, you know, that type of stuff, like 2 or 3 guys that could really be all conference caliber guys. I do sense though that sometimes they may be out on the field a little too much. I don't know the time of possession stats, but has there ever been a little vibe that they tend to get worn down a little bit?
Well, they should, you know, it's one of those things where their experience coming back on defense was one of the reasons I think if there was optimism for this team, that was where it was, right? Because they had so many experienced, you know, quality pieces, especially in the front seven coming back. I think that anybody who sort of looked at that defense and thought, hey, what Rosinski did in year one to turn what was an abysmal group for several seasons in the latter part of Broncos' tenure, to turn them around into a solid, if not sometimes good defense. You know what? You could project that out. And they're more talented this year. They got the experience back. They got lots of pieces. I think the one thing that everybody, and maybe myself included, underestimated was how much losing Nick Jackson in the middle of that defense was going to mean. I mean, listen, the kid had like a bajillion tackles over however that was at 3-4 seasons. He's all ACC linebacker. He was the heart and soul of this team. And losing him to Iowa via the transfer portal last year, you know, it really underscores just how difficult it can be, because that team, this defense just does not look anything remotely to me like the group I saw last year. That group last year, even if they did get in some really tough spots because the offense was just not really helping them out at all, they might have been on the field a long time, but you couldn't really tell. They still figured out a way to bend but not break. And this defense this year, there's been a whole lot of bending and a whole lot of breaking. Sure. You know, they've been really outclassed in the latter part of games. I think your fatigue point is well taken. I think guys are, if they're not pressing or they're pushing. Yeah, if they're not pushing or pressing, it's mainly, I think, because, you know, if you think about it, it's not so much that they're trying harder because they know the situation. It's that because they are being asked to do more. And I think that's a natural sort of evolution, right? For considering where they were last year. But the problem is they're not tackling as well as they were last year. They're not as sharp as they were last year. They've created one entire turnover to this point in the season on defense. They just have not been remotely who they were last year. And in some ways, and that's not quite as dramatic, but it feels like the shift from the 2021 offense to the 2022 offense. The 2022 defense to the 2023 defense feels like a major step in the wrong direction. Now, it's a young season. They started with Tennessee. They had an injury up front with Sua Gunlier on that weird coconut field in Nashville.
That's the craziest thing.
I mean, dude tore 2 patella tendons at once. That's just so unfortunate for that kid. He was in a position to really help them. So their depth took a hit. They've lost Ben Smiley through a concussion protocol. They've had some other injuries, right? They don't have Antonio Claire. They don't have Lex Long. They didn't have Josh Ahern against JMU. So there have been a lot of, early season injuries, which is not typically sort of the way things roll for them. Usually these are things that happen later in the year. So I think your fatigue point is right on, but I also think that this is an overall sort of skill set talent situation. They're just not in a position yet to be able to plug guys in and get the results from them. I think they have not been as successful in the transfer portal maybe as they hoped they would be. Some of the guys in the defensive backfield just haven't clicked as easily or as well as maybe guys have clicked for them in the past. And that certainly has been them at times too. They just have not been able to sort of settle on what that secondary is supposed to look like. And I think there are a lot of dudes who are sort of like moving around each other through reps, and they're not necessarily separating themselves from the group.
And just to wrap things up, we're talking to Brad Franklin, publisher of CavsCorner.com, part of the Rivals.com network. What are some of the nice places to eat in Charlottesville for any Raleigh fans coming up to the game? And then where can people find your work this week?
So if you're in town, anything down on the corner is a must. I'm a big fan of the Virginian myself. I've probably been going to that restaurant as long as most folks who are listening to this, if not longer, have been alive. It's a real hole in the wall, so you want to get there early, but it's great food, great environment, especially on game days or in this case, game nights. But really, I mean, anything down there, you're going to enjoy yourself. You're going to probably see plenty of state fans who are going to be at the game, because that's usually the way UVA attendance rolls lately. Going to be plenty of folks from the opposing fan base who are more than happy to take advantage of the opportunity to get a good seat. But yeah, you can check us out at CavsCorner.com. We've got a podcast available on all the various podcast networks. You can follow our work on Twitter, Cavs_corner. As I like to say, great place for the in-game updates, the content items, and the occasional witty banter.
Cool. Well, I appreciate your time, and we'll see how this game goes on Friday. Kind of wish it was a Saturday game or a Thursday game, but that's the way it is, man. Everybody's trying to make money, and all of a sudden now we got game. State's got 2 games on Friday back to back.
Yeah, this is UVA's second one too, so I get it.
That world was happening.
Yeah, it's very weird, very weird. But man, look, appreciate you having me on, JC. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.